budgeted at $5,675,405. That's after the adjustment for the 10% reduction that the community felt would likely occur. And it also is reduced slightly by some library funding and a school lunch program and a charge from Essex Aggie. This is the state aid FY02, FY03 budget, FY03 actual, the variance in dollars, and the variance in percent. I put this slide in, and I said no one's going to be able to read it, no one's going to want to read it, but I wanted you to know we have all the detailed data. You can see that the school department, essentially the enrollment aid stayed in, and the new Chapter 70 came out on a net basis, and there's some other significant changes. So again, where did we start from in April? When we did the budget in April, we were using a figure of $5,675,405. What was the FY03 actual? And this is again an apples to apples comparison, $6,073,556. That's additional aid of $398,151. We had some other good news. The state charges, these are items that come off of the sheet. In the FY03 budget, we used $280,491. The FY03 actual was $233,968. So we had a reduction in our charges of $46,523. Those two items together, again, the additional state aid of $398,151, reduced charges of $46,523, resulted in additional available revenue of $444,674. That does not bring the whole 10% reduction back. So I think the community was wise in its choice to take that 10% reduction. We have some uses of funds that are required to occur or have already occurred. One of them is the vocational school assessment. That assessment is $63,170 higher than was budgeted at April town meeting. And for the school department, under the approval of the budget, there was enabling legislation that allowed the town's finance committee, with also a vote of the Board of Selectmen, to appropriate additional monies without bringing it before town meeting. Because the schools opened in September and they were in dire needs of funds, the Board of Selectmen unanimously approved and FinCom approved, I can't remember if that was unanimous, but it was $228,902. So again, we've got that total available, the $444,674. That's the additional state aid and the reduction in the charges from the state. We've got those two uses I've already identified, $292,072. That leaves us with $152,602. And you might ask, well, why did I keep hearing about $118,000? The reason you heard about $118,000 is we also have general insurance that increased $33,000, and that was also a must-fund item. So when the board began its deliberations, we chose to deduct that from the $152,000. The additional funding of the cell tower revenue. The additional funding of the cell tower revenue is $92,101. The balance after that funding will be $29,960. The annual amount that's going into the cell tower revenue account is about $80,000 per year. I would say to the community that this is probably not the best way to fund it. The board deliberated long and hard. The cuts were very difficult. And this is a way to restore some of those cuts. This certainly makes it even more difficult as we move forward with next year's budget, if this is approved tonight, but the board felt it important to bring these restorations back to the community at tonight's meeting, and that's why we're here before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Can we now have a motion for line 6?
Line 6, general insurance. I move to increase line 6 of the FY 2003 operating budget, general insurance, by the sum of $33,225, and that said sum be raised and appropriated from the tax levy. Translated, that means the state aid.
Heard the motion. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation, Mr. Sturdivant?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. The Finance Committee unanimously recommended line 6. Again, as John mentioned, this is a must. We don't have any choice but to fund the general insurance.
Any further discussion on line 6? Hearing none. All those in favor of the main motion under line 6, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Unanimous. Line 31.
Line 31, police expenses. I move to increase line 31 of the FY 2003 operating budget, police expenses, by the sum of $15,550, and that said sum be raised and appropriated from the tax levy.
Mr. Moderator, the Finance Committee unanimously decided not to support this transfer. The reasons that we decided on that was that this is once again something we cut back in May because of the budget situation that we were facing. It doesn't look any better or any brighter. The cuts have already been made. If we restore them now, we're going to have to do this all over again in May. And we just don't feel it's needed at this time. We prefer, this is going to be the same explanation for most of the no's that you're going to hear that come from us tonight. We just don't feel that that's appropriate to do. We would rather take these funds left over, transfer them to stabilization to continue to build that hole, fill that hole that is still well underfunded.
Does the Board of Selectmen wish to make a recommendation, Mr. Murphy?
The Board of Selectmen recommends this is one of those items that was cut through the budget process, and there were many items in the police budget as well as within other budgets. The board feels that the restoration of these funds is necessary for the smooth and efficient operation of the department, and yes, it will make it more difficult in the next budget process, but we feel it is important and imperative to do so now, so we recommend. Thank you.
Gentlemen at the microphone, please state your name and address again.
Mel Webster, 51 Spruce Road. I'll relate this to this item, but it relates to all the items. I'm confused here. The numbers don't match up. This item says it'll be funded by previously unanticipated increase in state aid. Later on, it doesn't say where the money's coming from. So I'm just curious as to how these items were decided to come out of the unanticipated state aid and where the other items will be coming out of mystery money or monopoly money, because there's no source for the money stated in those items. I don't know how we can be voting on these without knowing what the source of the money is.
Mr. Murphy, would you please explain this?
Yes, to the body. As I read the motion, in the motion, I'm identifying the funding source. Some of the funding source will be the tax levy, which translated will be additional state aid. Some of the funding source will be cell tower revenue. Thank you. In this particular case, I said the funding source would be the tax levy.
Any further discussion? Ms. Jenkins.
Diana Jenkins, 226 Haverhill Street. I just have a question. Is the cell tower money considered part of our tax levy and our revenue stream?
Mr. Murphy?
No.
It's an enterprise fund?
The state aid, if I say tax levy in the motion for the budget item, if I say tax levy, that will relate to the state aid. If I say cell tower revenue, that's a different and separate funding source.
Okay.
That is specifically coming from the balance in the cell tower revenue account.
Okay, just through you, Mr. Moderator, is the cell tower money not being tax revenue raised also conditional to the 60-40 split with the schools, like all other revenues to the town?
Not at this time.
Could I have an explanation as to why that would not be in the 60-40 split?
It is our fervent hope that the 60-40 split will die with the next budget process. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, please state your name and address, sir.
William Smith, 230 Elm Street. If you look in the Finance Committee's report under October 2002 town meeting, it says unexpended funds, budget funds, that were returned in fiscal 2002 were $285,000. If in fact that's true, that tells me that there's $285,000 back in the general fund. If we need, as Mr. Murphy pointed out, and I think I went to all these meetings, by the way, on these additional budget fundings to increase the operational budget. When we first started, if you remember, you read in the local papers that the state level funded this particular year, which tells me that everybody was level funded at the same funds that they were funded in 2002. But then if you go through the budget carefully, you'll see that the police department, fire department, and other departments returned substantial amounts of money back to the reserve accounts in the free cash, or either that into the general fund. If in fact that's true, I think we should support the Board of Selectmen's recommendation on the $15,000, because I think the police department returned a lot more than $15,000 in 2002. And if we are going to have them operating efficiently, as Mr. Murphy pointed out, then I think you should support line item 31, the police expense. Thank you.
Mr. Murphy?
Just 2 quick points. We are not level funded on state aid. We are not level funded on state aid. And I apologize for saying that so many times. I think that's important and critical as we move forward as a community and as a Commonwealth to understand that. For the record, the free cash that's listed in the front of the warrant prepared by the Finance Committee is not yet certified, so that is not available at this evening's meeting. That is not available at this evening's meeting, and potentially would be available in April after certification. Thank you.
We'll take the, you'd like to hear from the, okay, Finance Committee Chairman Mark Sturtevant.
Just to further clarify what John just said about free cash not being certified. Just because the 285 was turned back, that is still subject within the certification process to things that can take away, such as a shortfall in the school department lunch program. Takes it directly away from that, as well as any other items such as that. So the 285, although it's definitely not available right now, may not be the final number that will come available later on.
Police Chief.
Henry Pennell, Police Chief. During the budget process, just to let you know how this process went, when we made out our budget, the police department, we submitted it to the town manager and the finance director. We sat down with them, we went through cuts, and then we sat down with the selectmen and the FinCom, and we went through additional cuts. And then we found out later there was additional cuts made. So I lost like $138,000 in overtime, and I lost over $43,000 in operational budget. And what that did, that hurt my repair and maintenance on my computers, my in-house computer, and my cruiser computers, plus a host of other things. I desperately need this money to maintain throughout the year our computer systems, our telephone systems, and cruiser repairs and office equipment. Hopefully you'll support this. Thank you very much.
Gentleman at the microphone, please state your name and address, sir.
Bob Armacost, 20 Liberty Lane. I've got a question for the Finance Committee. There was a comment made earlier about the stabilization fund and a reference that we're underfunded. I literally know no details about this, and I wanted to know, just for context, what you recommend we should be at, given other communities our size.